everybody, it's Annabel and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be deflasking a bunch of baby orchids that I've just received from Orchid in Germany. This is filmed currently at the beginning of October 2020, but I'm going to try and save this footage and do some updates and stuff. So we'll just see how far we get with that and the problems that we run into following deflasking and how they're getting on. I kind of wanted to film it as a series, so we'll see how this goes. I ordered a few different Phalaenopsis and some different orchids. So this is Phalaenopsis Belina. I've also got Phalaenopsis Guadelupe pineda crossed with Mok Choi Yew. Got Angrecum sesquipedale, also known as the Darwin orchid, a Gongora, a couple of different types. But some of these are looking great. As you can see here, the Belina is looking absolutely fantastic. I'm just trying to focus in on these great roots that we've got in this pot. Really lovely looking salad of orchid seedlings that we've got here. But some of them are actually contaminated. Now, if you've never seen an orchid flasking video before, essentially orchid seeds rely on a relationship with mycorrhizal fungi in nature, which is symbiotic. The fungi scavenges nutrients for them because they lack an endosperm, which is like a nutrient coat that normal seeds would have. So orchid seeds rely on this relationship with this fungi in nature, which we can't replicate in the home. So in order to grow them, we have to sow them onto a complete medium, and because of the nature of this medium containing lots of nutrients that the orchid seeds actually require to be able to germinate, it's a perfect ingredient for fungal and bacterial contamination, which can then rot the seedlings, so they need to be kept sterile. So what we're going to be doing is taking them out after a later stage in development. So these have been, the seeds have been flasked, they've been grown on by the nursery, they've been reflasked a few times probably, and then we're just going to take them out of their sterile container and let them enjoy air for the first time. Now, some of these are contaminated, as I said, including this one, which is the Phalaenopsis Guadelupe pineda crossed with Mok Choi Yew. So I'm just going to create some labels so that we don't get mixed up with the deflasking process, because the last thing I want is to mix up my labels and to have wrong ID orchids, which easily done, and that's why it so frequently happens that we get the wrong IDs. So this is the Guadelupe pineda crossed with Mok Choi Yew, and that is contaminated. So we're going to have an interesting progression report on how contaminated orchid seedlings do. My last experience was that they tend to not do so well, unfortunately, but it's interesting to observe. Now, the reason I ordered more flasks is because in my new environment, I'm finding that the things that worked in my old environment are not working for me in my new environment. So I'm going to try a couple of different methods to try and get this correct, because I do have some orchid seeds that I sowed myself on the go. So I want to get this right. So we're going to update at the end, like I said, but this is quite a heavily contaminated flask. So I'm just going to take these out and dunk them in warm water to remove the jelly-like medium, which has got all the nutrients and things in, and also a lot of bacteria and fungi at this point. Looks like a lot of this has rotted actually, unfortunately. There's quite a few rotted leaves in there and some roots are looking not so great. So I'll just speed through me taking them out. You don't need to see all that. Okay, so they're all out, lots of little rotten leaves, and there's a few that have lost all the leaves in here, so I won't do anything with those, because at this point, deflasking a seedling with no leaves, there's a chance it could recover, but I've got enough in here that I don't really want to have to deal with potentially rotting dead seedlings in the mix. So just going to gently kind of shake to loosen some of the media, and lots more leaves are falling off where they've rotted at the connection to the stem, which is sad, but these things happen. Transporting sterile containers like this, it's not the easiest thing. This could have happened in shipping, it could have happened before. Rolk are usually pretty good though, so I don't think they would send out intentionally contaminated flasks. I think this has probably happened during shipping. So I'm just going to spray these all down with 3% hydrogen peroxide, just because they've been contaminated. We don't know whether the bacteria and fungi in here are going to be pathogenic, but it looks like they are because they have rotted the seedlings, and there seems to be a lot of dead roots and dead leaves in here. So I really want to get rid of as much of this fungal bacterial contamination as possible. So I'm just going to take each out of its little water bath and spritz it down fully with 3% hydrogen peroxide, just to try and kill off any of those sort of pathogens that are on the orchid seedlings. This one, the root is pretty on the way to dead, but sometimes the velumen, the outer coating of the root, can look dead, but the inner root still be alive or still functioning to some extent, even if it's on the way out. So if it's not got many, then leave it on, I think is the safest option for these. So here we've got the strongest little seedling. So this is probably the one that stands the best chance. It has a new leaf starting, it's got a few good roots that don't look dying. So while these may not look too bad, the actual roots aren't great, which isn't fantastic, because when they come out of the flask, they have this kind of shock factor where they have to kind of switch their metabolism over from getting all of their sugars and nutrients from the medium to starting that photosynthesis process to be able to produce those sugars, because the medium itself contains the sugars that they require. So they kind of have to switch metabolism, and photosynthesis obviously uses up carbon dioxide and energy from sun to produce oxygen and carbohydrates, sugars. So yeah, we're not in the best starting point for these guys. What I'm going to be doing is using Synthic as a replacement for sphagnum moss in this mix. I tried seedlings before in sphagnum. I did a mix where I tried 3 different medium, and the sphagnum ones didn't work very well, they kind of rotted, but that was in my old environment. I don't really want to use sphagnum. I'm going to use this, and then I can put it through the washing machine after each batch when I eventually, when they're bigger, convert them to semi-hydro. The issue that I had this year is when bringing them over from the old house, it was the middle of summer and the conservatory was baking hot, and I essentially baked my seedlings from that move, and they didn't get watered for quite some time. So those ones did not do great. Semi-hydro is not particularly forgiving in very hot, dry conditions, which is where I moved them to. So I'm trying this. Obviously it is winter now, so what I'm probably going to have to do is follow wet dry cycles, because my humidity is so extremely high in the conservatory over winter. It's kind of crazy. It's like 80 to 90%. But for now, I'm going to start off by keeping these in the lounge, which is a warmer, more forgiving environment with around 40 to 50% humidity, so less chance of rot. And then eventually I will move these over to the conservatory when they're kind of adjusted to a little bit more of a forgiving environment. So we'll just need to see how that goes. So what I'm doing is I've put the Synthic on the bottom, and then I'm just kind of coiling the seedlings on the top, tucking their roots in, and putting a little bit more Synthic in to kind of tuck them in. So I don't want to submerge any of these in any of the media so that any wet media is sitting against the leaves. I just want them kind of sitting on top so they can get that moisture and humidity from the Synthic, but not any chance of rot. And I'll just see how these guys go. So that is the Phalaenopsis Guadelupe pineda crossed with Mok Choi Yew. Slightly bad start for these guys. They do have some new roots starting, but I'm kind of anticipating these struggling a little bit, just based on the infection in the flask and my previous experience with infected flask seedlings. So we'll see how they do. So in comparison to the Phalaenopsis bellina, you can see that there's quite a big difference in terms of size and the kind of overall health of the seedlings. So I would expect the bellina seedlings here to take right off, whereas these ones might struggle a little bit. So next up, I'm going to deflask the Angrecum sesquipedale, which is often called the Darwin orchid, due to the long nectar spur that led to Charles Darwin hypothesizing that a moth with a very long proboscis must be the pollinator, which it was indeed correct, which is why it's called the Darwin orchid. So I don't have a sesquipedale. I have a couple of different Angrecums, which I just love, and I've really wanted a sesquipedale, but they're not the easiest to get. So I'm settled on this flask, and we'll see how they do. I'm not sure how difficult Angrecums are to deflask. I've also got an Orangus in here. First impressions, they're pretty contaminated, but they don't look too bad. So there is some little cultures starting in this media, just small cultures, not like the massive mould clumps from the previous flask. But the media itself is kind of jellified, liquefied, sorry. So they look to be in reasonable shape. A couple have lost a few roots by the look of it. I've got a few roots just starting to brown on some of them, but the actual plants themselves are very big compared to the root mass. So we'll see how they do. So again, I'm just putting them straight into fresh warm water. I'm changing the water and washing up in between each flask that I'm doing. So I'm just putting them to bath in there and then gently kind of shaking them to remove the media. Put some Synthic in the bottom here of their little new cup that they're going into. And that is them all tucked into their little Synthic cup. We'll see how they do. They didn't actually have great roots, but otherwise they look pretty good. So it'll be interesting to kind of watch their progression and see how easy they are. Some orchids are easier to grow from seedling than others. Some slower growing or harder orchids, you know, the ones that have a bit of a reputation are often ones that are a bit more difficult to grow from seedlings from my experience, but we'll see how they go. Angrecums in general do quite well in my climate, so that is the Angrecum sesquipedale. They're looking pretty good other than obviously not having that many roots, but we do have live roots and the leaves are lovely and green. The actual plants themselves aren't rotting at all, so I think that the contamination probably only just happened for this flask. So next we're going to move on to our next little batch of seedlings. This is the Cattleya Oeclundiae, and unfortunately there's quite a few mould cultures in this flask again. So the actual seedlings themselves look very good. So again, I'm just going to type out a label for the Oeclundiae. And actually looking at the size of the seedlings here, I'm going to put them into a smaller container than originally planned, just because they're pretty tiny actually. They've got really good roots, but they're very small plants. So that is a contaminated flask again. You've seen a few of them now. I'm not going to film all of these deflasking. I will film a few and show you kind of representative ones. So again, just plonking them in nice clean warm water, and I am using tap water. My tap water isn't too bad, it's around 280 parts per million, but I'll then obviously actually water these afterwards with a low ppm water with some weak fertilizer in. Just tucking the roots in. So the roots on these are actually fantastic. The root systems are much bigger than the plants themselves, so I'm not sure how they're going to do, because the actual plants are very tiny, but they do have fantastic roots. So that is the Cattleya Oeclundiae all deflasked into their little container. Again, just watered with a dilute nutrient mix. Next we've got the Arangus fastuosa. This is the worst contaminated of the flasks. And you can see it's actually affected the leaves of these. They've got like brown spots on the leaves themselves. So I'm just going to try my best to separate out. It looks like they've grown really well in the flask, loads of roots, but then a lot of these roots are actually dead now. So I'm going to spritz the whole plants down with hydrogen peroxide. There's actually a clump of mould sticking to this plant here. So just any clumps of mould, I'll do my best to dislodge, and I've got a third pot of warm water waiting afterwards after I've like rinsed them once and hydrogen peroxide them. I'll then put them into the other thing. So we've got like a 3-tier system of water cleaning for them, little bath systems. So I'm just going to cut off the dead roots here because they are clearly quite dead. So I'm just going to gently snip off those roots. And it does have some good roots here, and the plants themselves look like they were doing fantastically in the flasks. They're nice big plants with what were nice good root systems. They've just the contamination has probably killed off the roots, unfortunately. Nice big clump of yummy mould there to remove, which is kind of nasty, but this is just what happens when flasks get contaminated. Some contaminations, I've been told, are not as detrimental to the plants. Dustin from Here But Not has shown me pictures of some contaminated flasks that were growing fantastically. So not all contamination is immediately pathogenic or detrimental to the plants, but most is, I think, unfortunately, and this type certainly seems to have been. So again, just removing the mould clumps, spraying down with hydrogen peroxide to kill any kind of mould and mould spores that are on the plants, and then just cutting off these dead roots. the ones that are clearly dead at least. This will just reduce the amount of rotting or decomposing material that is going into their new pots. And also remove that little dead leaf there. And again, just spritz that off with 3% hydrogen peroxide and pop it to dry. So that's all propped up to dry. And these are going to go into quite a small pot, I think, because they don't have the best or biggest root systems. So I'm just going to put them into quite a small pot. If I find that they're overcrowding each other, then I can always upgrade the pots. But for now, I just don't think that this big pot size is necessary. Also, I'm running out of big pots, and I do have some other flasks that need the bigger pots. So we are just going to put these into a small pot for now. And obviously I can repot as necessary. It'll be quite easy because Synthic is inorganic, so when it comes to repot, if there's Synthic really clinging to the roots, I can literally just leave it on and it'll act as a wick for the new medium that they go in. It's not going to decompose, but obviously I'm going to try and wash and reuse as much as possible. So again, just removing all of the obvious dead material from this plant. Unfortunately, there's quite a bit. And just any big clumps of media that didn't come off when I rinsed, I'm just kind of gently removing with my fingers. Spritz again with 3% hydrogen peroxide just to clean the plant down. And I should mention that I am cleaning my scissors off with 70% isopropyl alcohol in between flasks, not in between plants from the same flask though, because they have already been sharing media. So anything that they've got, they've all got, to be honest. So just trimming off the roots. I'm just starting the last plant now and just going to pop that into this little pot with its siblings. So as I said, they don't have particularly good root systems, so I think it's going to be beneficial for them just to kind of prop each other up in this smaller pot, because they do have quite large amounts of leaves and I don't want any leaves kind of sitting in media. So I'm kind of using the rim of the pot and the fact that I've bunched quite a few seedlings in here to kind of prop the leaves above the media, and then just tucking the little root systems into the Synthic so that they're obviously getting the moisture they need without any chance of rotting around the leaves or stem. So I think that'll work quite well until they get a little bit more established and bigger. So that is the Arengus fastuosa kind of repotted and deflasked. Looking quite good, apart from obviously not many roots, but we'll just see how they go. And I'm just going to water them with a dilute nutrient solution, which I'll do for all of these. So instead of my usual amount of rain mix, I'll half that to around 150 parts per million of my rain mix. And I will just give them a little bit of seaweed as well, and pop these under my bright LED lights on my lounge shelf. So just for reference, this is where they're going to start with. This is the Gongora truncata. I didn't show you the deflasking of this one actually, but they were looking pretty good, quite a lot of rot, but they sprang back very quickly. And these are the rest of my little seedling salads. Unfortunately, I brought in an African violet with aphids, and all of these guys got aphids, which I then had to treat, which unfortunately did cause some issues. So yeah, they got aphids. I've treated them. I ended up spraying them down with a mixture of SB plant invigorator and 70% isopropyl alcohol. So I really nuked them because I couldn't get rid of the aphids. And then I got spider mites. So they've had a little bit of a tough time, unfortunately, as you can see from a few like browning leaves. But yeah, the spider mites themselves were quite easy to get rid of. The aphids, usually I find them quite easy, but this time they were just resistant to everything I seemed to do. So I did manage to kill them off in the end, but not really what you want on your little baby seedlings. Of course, they all go for the most vulnerable plants, the seedlings, that you really don't want them to go for. And my Arengus actually was very sensitive to my quite harsh alcohol treatment of the aphids. So the leaves have browned a bit on those, but yeah, the Gongora's got quite nastily spider mited. I do need to start doing regular spider mite treatments now that spring is here, because I'm getting them again, which it was nice to have a bit of a break over winter, but apparently the spider mites are awake and active again. So that is my little deflasking video. I hope that you enjoyed the journey with me, and thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel to see more regular orchid updates, just showing you a couple of the other larger seedlings that I got here and that weren't in flasks. So just a bit of b-roll of my Phalaenopsis mariae, Epidendrum stamfordianum and Phalaenopsis stuartiana seedlings that I also got as just deflast seedlings. So the nursery had actually deflast them for me, so they're already larger size, but just thought I'd show you some more updates. And thank you guys so much for joining me today. I really hope that everyone's staying safe and well, and I will see you guys all soon next time. Bye!